Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
What's up, guys? It's Darren. Welcome back to the Touch MBA podcast. I'm wishing you a happy, fulfilling, and healthy 2022. I hope you spent some time with family and loved ones and friends over the holidays, and wishing you all the best for 2022 with your careers and MBA journeys. A lot of you have written to me asking for an episode, a careers episode for healthcare. And I can't think of a better guest than who I have on shortly. Veeral Desai is one of my best friends from high school. He also is a Harvard MBA. He worked at Bain for many years and has had executive leadership roles for two up-and-coming healthcare companies, Vantage Oncology and Agilon Health. I just love the way Veeral has thought about his career and been strategic about where he wants to position himself. And I think he has just a ton of great advice for those of you who want to break into the healthcare industry, but really any industry of your choice in terms of how to go about the recruiting process and how to really give yourself the best chance of getting your foot in the door at companies you're excited about. Also, I want to give a shout out to our new sponsor of the podcast. That's the Queen's MBA program. And I want to thank them for believing in our mission to provide quality information to you so that you can make the best MBA investment decision. The path to your next big career move goes through Canada. The 12-month full-time MBA program at Queen's University's Smith School of Business features a proven team-based experiential curriculum built around the exact set of skills that top employers seek. The results speak for themselves. 98% of the class of 2021 accepted an offer for their dream role within 3 months of graduation. Listeners of the Touch MBA podcast can receive a complimentary virtual consultation by visiting yoursmithmba.com/touchmba. That's yoursmithmba.com/touchmba. So yes, I want to thank the Queen's MBA for sponsoring the podcast and furthering our mission. Do check them out. And remember, at Touch MBA, you can get free school selection help. Just go to touchmba.com, upload your profile there, and we'd be happy to help you figure out which schools fit you best, your competitiveness at your target schools, and just give you some pointers on how you can improve your profile before you submit your application. So you can find all that at touchmba.com, and let's get to my conversation with Veeral Desai. All right, I'm really looking forward to this one, guys. My next guest is the Chief Strategy and Development Officer for Agilon Health. He's a Harvard MBA, and I got to read through his bio before, I introduce him. So, as Agilon Health's President of Enterprise Operations, he led the creation of Agilon's operating platform and held P&L and operating responsibility spanning the Western and Eastern regions of the company. And prior to joining Agilon Health, Veeral served in several senior executive roles at Vantage Oncology, where he oversaw the growth and development of Vantage into a leading national cancer delivery network. Before joining Vantage, Veeral spent nearly a decade as a leader in the healthcare practice of Bain Company, where he specialized in provider, payer, and technology segments. He's a Harvard MBA. Most importantly, he's one of my best friends from high school and acted with me in a number of award-winning videos in our English classes. So this has really been a podcast, 10, 20 years in the making. I'm so excited for it. Welcome, Veeral Desai, to the Touch MBA podcast.
Awesome. Thank you, Darren. And thank you so much for having me. And it's been awesome to watch the success of Touch and your following, and excited to share a little bit more about the healthcare industry and a little bit of my journey. And a little bit of our friendship along the way. So thank you so much for having me.
Yes. And I can't wait. I mean, Veeral, before, the call, I was looking through your LinkedIn and I'm just like, wow, there's actually so much I'm going to learn from this conversation myself as one of your good friends, about the amazing things you've done professionally and of course, learning from your insights in the healthcare industry. So our goal with these career episodes, guys, is to really shine a light on MBA careers in healthcare and what you need to know about breaking into the industry after your MBA. And as you can tell from Veeral's background, I mean, what better person to have to talk about this? I know he also hires a lot of MBAs. He has hired a lot of MBAs in the companies he's worked for. So let's first talk about you, Veeral, like your MBA story. What were you doing before business school? And what did you do after? And kind of what sparked your interest in healthcare?
Yeah. Awesome, Darren. Well, I mean, I think you have to start at the beginning, which was growing up in Thousand Oaks, California with the great Darren Joe.
There you go.
With a friendship that now spans almost 30 years. So just unbelievable to reflect on that. And I share part of that because I'm the product of a public education. I went to a great public middle school, public high school, where we became friends. I went to a great public university, Cal Berkeley. And I think those universities, that upbringing, my immigrant upbringing, really brought me to have a great deal of passion around healthcare delivery and transformation, also deep passion around public education and looking at just what are industries that you could have really, really big impact and there's just tremendous need. And so we'll come back and talk more about that. But as I look at the healthcare industry in the United States specifically, it just is an example of a massive opportunity to impact a system that is fundamentally on a lot of levels broken. It's a fifth of our GDP. We spend more per capita than any developed country, yet we have tremendous issues around healthcare access, around quality, around the consistency of care, the experiential factors around care. And so this opportunity to look at how do you fundamentally improve patient experience and outcomes, the experiences of patients, families, and communities. And then also the caregiver side of that, the experience of physicians, the experience of primary care physicians, oncologists, as I'll talk about in my background, frontline care delivery workers, nurses, medical assistants, people that are really at the front line about this pandemic and of the healthcare delivery system. And so that super inspiring, very mission driven, and you'll see that as a real thread as we talk about some of the decisions I've made in my career. But coming out of Cal, I knew that, I sort of thought a lot about what are ways in which I could go impact healthcare and thought about the physician path pretty deeply. I was pre-med and business, and ultimately arrived at the decision that my best both skill set application as well as the opportunity to have impact at scale. And so I was always thinking about system level, organizational level impact as a way in which I wanted to try and drive change in healthcare, that getting training that could help prepare me to lead organizations to impact communities at greater scale, that training ground was going to be very important. And so I was fortunate to start my career at 20 years old at Bain as a summer intern. I was, lucky to land in that spot. We can talk more about, sort of the fortune and the preparation around getting into that firm. But really, for me, it was about getting that general management skill set, grounding in analytics, business fundamentals, strategy, communicating with senior audiences, getting this massive exposure to a range of industries. I was able to go deep in private equity and healthcare and technology and do all of that in kind of the early years of my career before heading off to business school, and I actually returned to Bain post business school. And so can talk more about the Bain experience kind of pre and post MBA. And then I know we'll come back and talk about some of these decision points going into healthcare, but that's a little bit of kind of the story from coming up through undergrad and some of the early decision points around going into consulting as a first launching pad out of undergrad.
Amazing. And so were you always in the healthcare practice of Bain your entire time?
Yeah, so Bain's really neat firm in that I think it really breeds strong generalist training. If you want to go deep, you can go deep, but I'd say I'd kind of divide my Bain experience into two chapters, pre-MBA and post-MBA. Pre-MBA, I was doing, functional work spanning strategy, post-merger integration, due diligence for M&A, through industry work that spanned technology, healthcare, private equity. And so I was broad and not necessarily deep. It was really during that business school journey that I got really focused around, differentially spending time in healthcare, even within my Bain experience. And so all of my case experience largely after business school was working with healthcare organizations across the spectrum of healthcare.
Got it. Wow. Yeah. So our old Veeral and I took advanced anatomy as high school seniors, where we were so blessed actually to work on cadavers. I totally forgot you were a pre-med in college. That's right. You were thinking of becoming a doctor at some point, right?
Yeah, well,
clearly.
I think we realized, was not bright enough to take down the basic sciences path, but it was a pretty neat experience for us. Amazing. As 17-year-old kids getting to take a class that was modeled after the first year of medical school. So definitely shaped the interest around healthcare. But I think a big decision point for individuals, I think, has to be, how do you think about impact? I always think about the impact quotient. How do you think about scale? I think that should really help drive your decision-making around what type of role, what type of organization, what type of stage of company do you want to work in? And I think those factors are really important ones to come back to as you think about the criteria around what's going to make the right, next step for you in your career and your journey.
So I love that. So that's a perfect segue into how did you decide, right, that moving from Bain to Vantage Oncology was your next step? Yeah. And then how did that come about? Were you planning, was this kind of always in the cards, or, did the opportunity present itself? Like, tell me about that pivot point for you. Yeah.
So, I would say Bain is a great environment to stay on the train. And, there are wildly impressive partners and leaders at Bain that are doing incredible things. I saw that path with a lot of admiration, but I knew that was not my path. I wanted to run companies. I didn't want to advise and guide. I wanted to lead companies. I felt there was a different management challenge that sat in working with a very diverse and broad segment of the population, being able to actually be part of leading a mission-driven healthcare organization, actually being in that organization and having the kind of the honor and the opportunity to lead it. I also was very passionate about earlier stage companies. I felt like this opportunity to look at companies that were still very early in their development, had work to do to define and refine their model, and then really position those businesses and organizations to scale rapidly in terms of their impact that they could have at the community level, at the physician level, at the patient and family level. That was really exciting to me. So those are pretty divergent points to say, I want to go lead companies. I want to go do those at an earlier stage.
Yep.
That made it very clear it was time for me to look probably at what would be non-traditional exits from consulting. Consulting, you go shoot off into private equity. There are people that do shoot off and go do purely entrepreneurial things. A lot of folks, though, would land in bigger corporate organizations because those are the nature of the client base for a Bain or a McKinsey or a BCG or Fortune 500 type clients. So that's a natural gateway and entry point into those types of businesses. So I would say my path was less typical. And I think what was really important to me, in addition to the point on kind of being in a mission-driven healthcare business, doing that at an earlier stage, was I really wanted a general management experience. So I wanted to run a P&L. I wanted to, lead a sales organization. I wanted to really get my hands dirty and entrenched in terms of operating a business. And so that became a very critical criteria. I would say that made the search even more challenging because, a lot of folks who are coming out of consulting, they want to put you into a strategy role. Right. They want to put you into a business development role. So thinking through, and that can be okay.
Right.
But thinking about if you want to really diversify and create these pillars of experience that can make you a truly well-rounded executive and prepare you for that next step and that next step, how are you entering an organization, working with a set of leaders that are going to give you that type of mobility, create those types of at-bats so you can build the right base of experience, even if that means you come into an organization pitching from your fastball or doing what I did, which is, hey, here's a kind of bright athlete. We're just going to throw him into a general management role and lead a sales organization and see how he does, which was pretty unique. But again, I think a function of being in an earlier stage company where the opportunity you have to touch more, lead more, affect more, albeit in a less structured environment, it presents itself. So something to think about as you think about stage of company, that I would say I'm much more intentional now as I guide and mentor others, but I think I fell into more as a function of the decision I made to join Vantage.
I love that. I love that you knew exactly what you were looking for, right? And then the question is kind of, well, how do you get in? How do you get your foot in? Like, how do you recognize what are these companies that fit that? How do you find leaders that will give you those at bats, as you mentioned? Yeah. How did you kind of get your foot in the door there?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think there's a lot of different sort of tactics. One, I would say, cast the net wide, and a lot of people decide, hey, I want to go make a career move. But recognizing that for the right career move and with the right level of introspection, that can really take some time.
Yeah.
Having the right sets of conversation, getting exposed to a breadth of organization so that you build your own pattern recognition, your own set of data points around every single job is going to have trade-offs. How do I get more clear in my mind about what those trade-offs are? And how do I kind of develop deeper pattern recognition around, hey, when is it, if for me, mission is critical, culture is critical, the DNA of the leadership and the board is critical, but you don't build, you build the pattern recognition around those things through meeting a lot of companies, having a lot of conversations. And so now the world of LinkedIn and, all of the different ways in which people can formally and informally network. I mean, there's never a conversation when somebody reaches out to me that I'm not willing to have, even with, in many cases, strangers. If they're so I think being able to lean into those networks to be able to have conversations to build that pattern recognition, I would not be discouraged at all if you don't have a healthcare background. Healthcare is one of those industries that is, it's a fifth of GDP. It's got so much structural issues, and there is a lack of real business leadership, real managerial prowess to go take all these organizations and build the organizations of the future. So I really value disproportionately people coming in with fresh perspective, who are able to articulate how they can apply the skills that they've gained in a fast-paced, high-growth, mission-driven organization. So thinking really deeply about how does my skill set apply? Not that I don't have the specific expertise. If you go to the right organizations, there are organizations that are excellent at consuming best talent and do a great job of onboarding and developing people to give them the expertise. So DaVita is a great example of that. DaVita's 15 years ago, people didn't know a heck of a lot about DaVita. DaVita's a kidney dialysis company, but they were run and led by an HBS guy. They built unbelievable talent in that organization. And a big part of how they did that was they created a leadership development program and culture that attracted people from all different walks of life, but that had the DNA to go want to learn the business and then figure out how to be really impactful. I do think they were very deliberate about culture and mission, getting that right fit. But again, these organizations that have the infrastructure to help somebody go make a career change. Consulting is another one of them, right? You go decide you want to go. There are a lot of places where you can go get deep and broad in healthcare by a consulting experience. So thinking about those different entrees into organizations that really know how to consume an MBA's talent. I'd say the hallmark of the businesses that I've been lucky enough to be a part of building is that we've tried to build that mousetrap to say, okay, Vantage Oncology, this was a VC backed at the time, healthcare services business, not on anyone's radar. We had an exceptional CEO, HBS guy, multi-time successful entrepreneur, but we built a culture, and a lot of my responsibility was how do we attract the DNA of top flight MBA talent coming into this business and feeling like they could go have the type of experience that I had, go run a business, go lead a sales organization, go lead a major function for the company and have a path to doing that. Agilon Health, we've done the same thing. We've gotten unbelievable talent from the pre and post MBA world. And part of this is we've created an engine in both those organizations where people came in pre-MBA, we supported the MBA process, they applied, they returned. And they all went to top 5 MBA schools, Harvard, Stanford, Wharton type MBA schools. So I think organizations and leaders matter a lot, and would just say, get out there, have those conversations, lean into those networks, and don't let the fact that you don't have a traditional healthcare or science background dissuade you from making the leap. Show up hungry, do your homework. And I think if you find the right types of organizations, I think they're yearning for top talent, and that's industry agnostic.
Wow. I mean, so for example, did you guys go recruit on campuses? Because I'm just trying to put myself in the position of, someone totally new to the industry, right? Maybe they haven't worked in the healthcare, practice of Bain. And so they're kind of watching the market, like reaching out to alumni, of course. But I mean, is there a simpler way to do this to kind of get a broader perspective of all the different companies and opportunities?
Well, I'd say now in the sort of MBA on-campus recruiting, I think it's evolved significantly, certainly since I was an MBA. As I look at pharma, med device type companies, so we haven't talked a lot about life sciences, like they have a lot of established brand infrastructure and programs. So that they're, places like Genentech, places like Medtronic. I mean, they have real machines around recruiting MBA talent, putting them through rotational programs in functional areas of the business, and recruit very actively and aggressively in the MBA sort of on-campus process. Insurance companies, kind of the payers of the world, Anthem, Humana, United Healthcare. Similarly, I think they're pretty active in terms of on campus. I'd say where you have to be much more scrappy, more entrepreneurial, get yourself in the right circles are these earlier stage companies.
Yes.
Right? Vantage at the time when I joined, Agilon is a 5-year-old company, but I think as you start to leverage your pathways into entrepreneurship, a lot of the entrepreneurial programs that exist within the healthcare ecosystem in a number of these campuses, you start to put yourself into networks with professors, with alumni that give you more and more visibility. The other thing that I did is I looked at, what are aggregators effectively that you could go look at and say, hey, is anything across a portfolio of maybe a smaller, earlier stage company interesting? So go look at NEA. NEA is a great VC firm.
Say that again.
NEA, New Enterprise.
Yep.
What is their portfolio of healthcare businesses? And use that to go source ideas. That's what I did when I found Vantage. Vantage was actually an NEA company. NEA is a terrific world-class venture capital firm. That led me to go figure out how to have a conversation at Vantage Oncology. So as you think about where is the smart money being put to work in the market, those segments kind of give you an opportunity to go look at what are the portfolio companies, what are the spaces within which these investors, these growth equity investors are making bets, and gives you yet another channel to source ideas around companies and start to look at where your networks intersect with potentially companies and different leaders you can network with.
It's fantastic advice, Veeral. And I mean, let's talk about interacting with alumni, right? Because like you said, you're generously kind of making yourself available to people who wanted to get in touch with you. I'm sure you've done the same to others, right? there's a sort of art to do it. I just love to hear, for example, like when someone reaches out to you and is kind of sniffing around, right? Trying to both find out if there's an opportunity and show you that he or she is, can bring a lot of value. And like you said, like bring that engine and that orientation of mission, right? Or alignment with your mission. Like what tips do you have there for MBA students kind of reaching out to alumni or people in the industry to have a really productive sort of informational interview or a conversation?
Yeah. I mean, the things that I look for are humility and hunger. When you got to understand that someone, even if they're someone like me, who I mentor multiple students a year at HBS, I keep in touch with those folks who are, I just met through that type of program. I've got a whole bunch of folks that I do that on a formal and informal basis with. I get a lot of energy around that, but yeah. I think there are an understanding that this is somebody you're looking to engage in a pretty deliberate way. So as you think about that email outreach or what that outreach looks like, that's pretty curated and thoughtful, that you've done some research on their organization. You've done some research around their background. Perhaps there's things you can draw on. Hey, I understand you were in consulting previously and you made this transition to operating companies, and you've got a narrative and there's been some real thought and intentionality around the person or their organization around why the connection would be meaningful to you.
Yeah.
And then I think it's being really thoughtful about, meeting them where they are. I mean, folks like me is incredibly tough just with calendars, right? So when you get offered a time, you make it happen, and you really try and make it happen, and you be okay with, calendars moving and being flexible. That goes to that point of kind of being hungry and humble, right? That you really want that interaction. When you come into that interaction, I think it's really showing the enthusiasm, having done the homework about both the person, about the topic, and in your own mind, being pretty deliberate about what your objectives are. I think if I'm coming on to a call with effectively a stranger, right, it is really helpful for me to understand, okay, this is somebody that's done their homework. They know a little bit about me. They know about the business. It feels like they're wrestling with these two kind of business and career questions, and that's how we're going to spend our time. But maturity of being able to organize a conversation with a senior person in that way is something that most people lack. And it's what leads to somebody saying, hey, this is a relationship I actually want to invest in, versus, hey, happy to have that first conversation and, look forward to hearing how things go. And so just think about that humility, that hunger, that preparation, all of those, I think, none of which are probably earth shattering, but you'd be surprised how many people don't do those things. Yeah. And it leads to very different engagement and very different outcomes.
And so the recruiting process, I mean, could you kind of walk us through, I don't know if you want to talk about one of your organizations or organizations you've worked for or, previously, but like, what is that recruiting process like? Is it similar to consulting type interviews or, what is that like?
Yeah. It depends on the role. So I would say, it's typically we're recruiting through all the, sort of typical channels. So we would post on your MBA job boards. We'd post on LinkedIn, trying to really cast the net very wide in terms of candidate base. And then, the way I try to approach it is I like to have individuals that are, let's say we're hiring someone on our strategy team. We clearly need kind of our strategy leader, as kind of the key pivot point. But I'd also want a perspective from business development, a perspective from operations and implementation, so that individual gets the candidate gets a more holistic view of the business across the different dimensions, but that we as a management team in making a decision have a more longitudinal view of the candidate. So the person around operations isn't testing to say, hey, is this strategy person a great operator? But they are going to bring a different lens to the conversation that is going to be really valuable as an input into this consensus-based process of trying to get the best people. It's also a very powerful way as a company for an individual to learn a lot through 4 or 5 conversations about a business and really assess that mutual fit. And just can't emphasize sort of two other things in the interview process. One is, fit and mission orientation, healthcare business. Like, people are in healthcare are there for a reason. If it was all about dollars, you probably would choose something different. So the mission orientation and fit, I would say, with many organizations is absolutely huge. And so really trying to understand what is the culture like, really seeing, does that mission resonate with you and can you speak to it in an authentic way? And then the second piece is, and this goes to the career switcher or somebody who may have, healthcare data points on the resume, is like really thinking about, okay, I'm applying for a business development job in a healthcare company with this type of growth with this type of growth strategy and this type of pace. How does my skills and experiences in my prior organizations, whether they're healthcare or not, translate to what I think is going to be effective in this environment? What's going to be important? And look for the cues. The questions are cues. The comments being made by the interviewer are cues. So if you go into it really with a learning mindset, I think your ability to then iterate in real time, be much more compelling as a candidate, and be much more, I think the best interviewers over time are able to really effectively understand the organization, the role, the team, and then be able to translate in a very custom way what they've done to create a really strong fit in the mind of the interviewer and of the company in terms of how those skills and experiences translate.
Oh man, I hope our listeners are taking notes on this. This is awesome. So is there anything else, like in terms of just the recruiting process? I love how you summed that up into, the fit and mission and showing how you can really add value, like really doing your research and being very intentional about that. But I mean, I just want to, anything else that comes to mind there in terms of the recruiting process with tips?
I would just say be persistent. I mean, I shared this story. People are busy. I know it seems so obvious, but like Vantage as an example, I knew a Bain alum who happened to be in a role at Vantage. I reached out, didn't hear anything. I ended up just saying, hey, I'm an HBS alum. The CEO is an HBS alum. I sent him an email. I got an email back, and it changed the next 5 years of my life, right? And so,
wow.
So just, persistence and will, kind of the confidence and belief in yourself. And you don't need 10 of these to strike. You need one, but you need to cast the net wide enough, be persistent enough around it for good things to happen. And I think so many times people, are waiting for somebody to hand something to them. I think, or feel sort of bad because somebody didn't respond or didn't feel like they were a fit for something. Keep on keeping on is my biggest thing. And I look at that in candidates. When somebody comes back to me,
right,
I'm like, I don't know how I feel about the candidate. I've got a ton of things going on, but they come back and they're continue to be thoughtful in their engagement, right, in their demonstration of interest. Gosh, like it says a lot. It may not always translate to an outcome, but gosh, I walk away with a very positive sort of set of data points. And you'd be surprised even now how many recruiters ask me to opine on people who I didn't even hire, but who I interviewed in a process for our company. So you are creating perception through your behavior. So, just keep on pushing. And two, be cognizant of the fact the world gets smaller and smaller and smaller as you get senior and senior in your career. And you are making really important data points today in terms of the type of person that is showing up, how you show up, and what that says about what your contributions would be as a leader, manager, executive in a business.
It's awesome, man. I mean, having kind of working at the top of both both organizations you've been with in the industry, like, what do you have to say about the traits and skills it takes to succeed and like really accomplish those things you mentioned at the beginning of our of this episode, right? Like impacting at scale and really making a difference. Like, what do you think those skills are?
Well, first, this is a little bit of a segue, Darren, on your question, and then I want to come back and answer it in terms of the individual. But one thing I learned the hard way is you have to be really thoughtful about picking an industry, a space within that industry, a business model that you think has real long-term potential for impact. To give you an example, Vantage Oncology, for me, it was a natural fit. Here's community cancer care, creating access for patients, a better patient experience through better physicians, better technology, more integrated care, made all the sense in the world. The macro environment of reimbursement in that sector was incredibly challenged. We ended up building an incredibly valuable network and company, but the headwinds in that sector were incredibly formidable. We were the pristine house on the tough street. So thinking about how do I think about, again, being in the right neighborhood, being able to have a model that I really believe is differentiated in terms of the outcomes it delivers and in its scalability. And then, am I in the right role, having the right impact, right? But you have to because you have to really think about it that way if you're going to have what I think we've been lucky to have in both of these environments, which is differentiated impact and scale organizationally, but then translating that into great business success and individual success and outcome. Like that's really hard to do all of those things. And that's why you see a lot of people have, a lot of bumps in the road, a lot of experiences that are sub-optimized on some of those core levers that lead to, a big range of outcomes. And so would call those out. And then I think on the individual basis, as I look at, Vantage and Agilon, to me, it is about when you're in an early stage business, you've got to be able to continue to iterate on the business model, iterate on the operations, figure out how do you every day build a better operating model, a higher performing business model, a culture that supports attracting and retaining the best people early in a company. Like you sort of take for granted, like you are set such a foundational phase where if you could figure those things out, you figure out the operating model, you figure out how to tweak and tune the business model, it puts you in a very different position to, again, think about scale and think about the impact you can have. In this market, there's no shortage of equity capital. There's no shortage of people willing to throw money at good ideas. But getting what I look at out of the box is the core model, is the unit economic model of a joint venture operated, physician owned cancer center. What makes that really high performing? And have we figured out that mousetrap? Agile, have we figured out a better model for helping primary care physicians take care of seniors in a total care model that's focused on experience, quality, and cost, right? And if you can really iterate on that type of model, bring people to the business, and this is where, you think about talent profiles, for me, it's not about just, let's go find the McKinsey consultant and put them into a business like this. Actually, 80% pragmatic, 20% strategy. So how you think about translating skill sets in operating environments, particularly early stage ones, becomes such an important part of the success criteria. And that's where I think this continuous improvement and iteration mindset becomes so important. It's where kind of the blue collar strategist, somebody who can understand strategically what I need to do, but operationally drive change, build teams, create the right level of stakeholder alignment. All those things become real differentiators in terms of success factors for the business.
I love this idea of blue collar strategist. I feel you're one of those, Veeral. You're like, well, thanks, Dan.
Maybe not 10 years ago, but I'll tell you, the thing that I've appreciated more and more, and this is not at all intended to be negative around consulting. Consultants, sort of that Bain, McKinsey, Deloitte, you name the firms, the training there are tremendous.
Yeah.
The talent that comes into those places is really distinctive. But I think what I look for in an operating context, or if I was an investor looking to put money behind a team, is can you translate that excellence in thinking, in analytical acumen, overall business acumen, and can you translate it into outcome, right? Which is leading people, getting the right deals done, building the right type of organization that can scale, which I think are pretty unique skill sets. But if you could bring those two together, well, I mean, that's where you can be really distinctive. And when you think about building a distinctive career, sometimes, like, you go back to this decision around leaving consulting, for me, it was recognizing that I was not strong operationally. I had not run a P&L. I had not led a team that wasn't stacked with, Ivy League graduates, and saying, I need to go do all of that, because if I do, I will be a much more complete business person and leader. And so think about those gaps where you can be purposeful about the experiences you get to fill those gaps so that you can become a more complete business person, a more complete leader.
No, absolutely. I mean, one question I have about this whole iteration aspect that you mentioned is, of course we hear that, in the startup world that I'm in, or the tech world, but like healthcare, right? I mean, it like iteration with people, like patients and doctors and physicians. And I would imagine, as someone not from the industry, that would be a lot more painful and longer and drawn out than, putting an app up on the app store. So how do you kind of incorporate that human element into everything, which is really at the core of what you do?
I mean, it's all about alignment, right? People want to iterate. They'll want to get it right if everybody is aligned around the outcomes we're trying to drive. And so Agilon is probably the best example of this, right? Our business is a joint venture partnership business where we're partnered with physician groups around the country. We don't own the groups. They're fully independent, but they partner with us around managing the care of their senior patients. And where the alignment comes is we are 100% aligned around the outcomes we want to drive, which is we want off the chart physician and patient experience, patient outcomes, patient quality scores. And we want to, in this big theme in healthcare around value-based care, we want to figure out how do we deliver that care by eliminating more of the waste that exists in the delivery system. And that fundamental thesis is what everyone is aligned around and rallying around. And so that creates this opportunity to go innovate and iterate around what are the ways in which we go take out waste in the system. Here, what are ways that we can go deliver a better patient experience. And what's so disruptive about this model specifically is, if you take what's been wrong in healthcare for so long, is that physicians are incentivized to do more, to produce, to see more patients. This puts them in the model to be the type of physician they want to be, see fewer patients, spend more time with their high risk and most vulnerable patients. So this is where I go back to model, being in the right neighborhood, being in the right model, where you can create that alignment to drive this type of change. And what's so exciting about it, right, is it's a big country and there are so many communities with physicians that want to be in this type of model. And when you have a model, again, that has the depth of alignment around the right set of things, we can really build a business. And this is probably one of the last parting thoughts I'd leave on healthcare is you can build a business in healthcare that really positively impacts society, patients, families, and you can do that while creating real value.
Amazing. Yeah.
And that's so unique. How many careers can you do that in? And so, to all your listeners, I would just encourage people to look long and hard at healthcare, because there's so many big problems structurally that need to be solved in the system. And there's such a dearth of great talent chasing those problems and helping to build the organizations of the future. We need more people helping us build a better healthcare system for the United States and for the world.
If we can kind of pivot to you, right, and your experience, I mean, just speaking real, right, like your daily work, I know you've been working really hard, right? What are kind of the parts of the day that make you really glow and you're just so excited about? And what are the parts of the day where you're like, oh, this is a drag? Like you mentioned headwinds, and every industry has them.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts there.
Yeah. Well, the things that give me energy are people. And so, it's conversations with our team, career development conversations, coaching conversations with teammates around how do we get better? And we talk about iteration, we talk about professional development. That's not a performance review discussion that happens every 6 months. It's how are we getting better? How are we getting better as a team? How am I getting better? But I think that interaction with the team, and then, when you talk about alignment, people feeling the level of conviction and belief around what we're doing and why we're doing it. It's a pretty energizing place to spend your career and spend your life. And so people's one big part of it, I'd say internal team. I'd also say clinicians and caregivers, right? Being able to be partnered with incredible physicians. I mean, these are the types of physicians, if you're, God forbid you had a family member or parent with a health issue, these are the primary care physicians you want to send your parents to for care. And those are the physicians that you're spending time trying to think about, okay, how do we solution? How do we do better? How do we deliver better care? How do we deliver better experience? And so that is a super energizing part. And it's a big part. I mean, those two things are a huge part of how I spend my time. So that's where I think a lot of the fulfillment comes from. Where some of the head scratching and the challenge comes from is, there's just much as there's a lot of policy uncertainty in healthcare, right? So, I gave the Vantage Oncology example around cancer care reimbursement. When I was in community-based cancer, the reimbursement for Medicare was reduced 30 to 35% over a 5-year period in a very fixed cost business. And despite that, we were able to grow the heck out of the business, grow revenue, grow earnings, impact more and more patients and communities. But that was a annual sort of overhang every year on what's going to happen with cancer reimbursement. Similarly here, there's so much uncertainty. And I think a lot of it's well-intentioned around how do we get to the right answer? And in any government program, there are imperfections, there are abuses, but I do fundamentally believe, we're in Medicare and Medicare Advantage. These are programs that are delivering massive value to the patient population. They need to continue to be refined, but the sort of that overhang of what you can't control and how you plan today, resource today, without having the controls on what the rules of the game are, that's just part of healthcare. And so that's something that I think people that are coming into this industry need to understand. But what I always go back to on any of that is, in cancer, there can continue to need to be solutions to deliver great care for cancer patients. Senior population is growing dramatically. The opportunity and the need around 65 plus over the next 20 years is as big as any market, any need in the country. And so always a good amount of policy and regulatory uncertainty, but the market needs are massive, and the opportunities to improve and deliver more innovative, high quality, technology enabled models are very much at our fingerprints and are the important work ahead in the decades ahead.
I mean, last question, Veeral, looking forward, living through this pandemic, how has that kind of affected the industry? I mean, both maybe in terms of recruitment, but also just in general.
Yeah. I mean, we've been in the heart of it, right? I mean, our physician groups are front line for, 250,000 plus seniors across the country. It's accelerated the adoption of remote care models, of telehealth. We had a massive pivot in March of 2020 from, less than 5% of care being delivered in telehealth to, 80% plus in some of our practice. It hasn't, it's kind of pivoted back now, now that more in-person is possible, but just that the paradigm could change that much. Remote work, right? Running a company, our workforce is 80% plus remote. That's really unique. It used to be, certainly in healthcare, the mindset you need to all be in the same building, the same city, rowing together. But I think it allows you to think differently about talent, right? Best talent, for you MBAs, like where you can work, the types of organization you work, the way in which you work is going to look fundamentally different. And we as a leadership team are spending so much time thinking about, okay, how do we differentiate to be best talent, oriented around best talent in this remote environment where people really value being remote, but they also miss the elements of collegiality and affinity that get built from being in the same place, working through problems together, spending time face to face with their managers and their peers. So, those remote elements are very rare, both in the care delivery setting and in the work setting. And then I'd say the other piece is, we talked about the growth in the senior population, vulnerable population. That's going to test the system uniquely. And I think with the pandemic, they've been some of the most vulnerable, right? We've been trying to avoid seniors getting COVID and thinking about models that are going to allow our senior patients to access as much clinical resources as needed to help shepherd their experience, figure out how we do that in a more tech-enabled way, figure out how we do that in a way that, again, applies differential resource to the patients that are high risk and vulnerable and need it most. And then, I think this value-based care theme that everybody talks a lot about as a popular theme, I just see that accelerating. The way in which physicians and providers are going to be paid is no longer going to be a production-based system where we've seen that adoption grow dramatically. It's going to continue to grow, and it's going to be about driving patient experience, driving outcomes, lowering costs, creating a more sustainable healthcare system. Tons of work there to continue to build those models out. But it's fun at Agilon being kind of right in the nexus of all of that work around primary care and value-based care.
Yeah. Wow. What a conversation, Veeral. I'm sure my audience will love this. I certainly just learned a lot. Like it's amazing to catch up and like learn from all your experience there. And there's a lot of tips I feel that you gave with the recruiting that could be applied to all industries too, not just healthcare. But I think our audience members who are looking into the industry will certainly be energized by this conversation. So thank you so much, bud. It's been a while. So I'm so glad you agreed to do this. So thank you so much, man.
Thanks so much for having me, Darren. All the best to you and your family in 2022, and all the best to listeners on their MBA and post-MBA voyages. And they're lucky to have you helping shepherd some of that experience.
All right, bud. Thank you so much.
All right. Happy New Year. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Touch MBA podcast. Remember, you can get free school selection help and a profile review at touchmba.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Just search for Touch